My name is Isabella Sterling, and I'm 32 years old. It was 11:47 p.m. when my phone buzzed against the quiet hum of my office. I was reviewing quarterly reports, half listening to the city breathing through the glass walls of my 39th floor workspace when I saw the message. Dad, we're selling the house tomorrow. Your stuff will be on the curb. Don't bother coming by. I read it 3 times before I set the phone down beside my keyboard. No anger, no surprise, just that same dull ache that had lived inside me for years, the kind that comes from realizing you're never going to be enough for the people who raised you. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights casting fractured patterns across my desk. The same desk where 3 years ago I'd signed the papers to purchase our family home through my holding company, Sterling Properties LLC. They thought they still owned it, thought their mortgage payments were going to the bank. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly channeling those payments into a trust fund for their retirement. For 3 years, I let them believe they were standing on their own feet. I'd never wanted them to know they'd lost everything, especially not their pride. But tonight, with that message, maybe it was time they finally saw the truth. Another buzz, another message, Dad. And don't expect any family support anymore. You've been nothing but a disappointment. Time to face the real world. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It wasn't new he'd said versions of that my entire life. When I chose tech instead of construction, when I moved out young, when I didn't marry someone stable. This was just another chapter in a very old book. I typed one word back. Okay. Then I set the phone aside and returned to my reports, though the words blurred on the screen. Somewhere between the columns of profit margins and projections, I caught my reflection faintly in the window, a woman who'd built empires from silence, who learned early that validation would never come from home. When my phone rang again, I almost didn't answer, but the caller ID made me pause. Richard Morrison, my realtor, and the one person who knew that the Morrisons he was representing didn't actually own the house they lived in. "Good morning, Richard," I said, though my voice was steady in a way my chest wasn't. "Miss Sterling," he began cautiously, "we have a situation. There's a gentleman here claiming he owns the property at 1247 Maple Street. He wants to list it for sale immediately." "That would be Robert Morrison," I said, allowing a small, humorless smile. "My father." "Yes, ma'am. I wasn't sure how to proceed." "Put him on speaker." There was a shuffle then, that familiar booming voice, commanding and patient, the same tone that used to fill our kitchen when I was a kid. "Look, I don't know who this Sterling person is, but I own this house free and clear," Dad snapped. "My family's lived here for 15 years. I want it listed today for $850,000. Sir Richard replied gently, "According to county records, this property is owned by Sterling Properties LLC. You'd need the owner's permission to list it." "That's impossible," Dad barked. "I have the deed right here. That deed shows your original purchase from 2009. The property was sold to Sterling Properties in 2021 after Morrison Construction defaulted on the mortgage." Silence. Heavy, cutting silence. I could picture his face, jaw tight, that look he used to give when one of his workers questioned him. Only this time there was no one to intimidate. "Richard," I said calmly, "please give Mr. Morrison my contact information. Tell him the property owner would like to discuss the situation." There was a faint exhale of relief from Richard. "Of course, Miss Sterling." When the call ended, I stared again at the phone waiting. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, it rang again. "What the hell is going on?" Dad's voice exploded through the speaker. "Who is Sterling Properties? How did they get my house?" "Hello, Dad," I said quietly. The line went dead for a second. Then, "Isabella, how do you know about this?" "Because I said, leaning back in my chair, Sterling Properties is my company." There was no sound at all. Then a whisper. "You own our house." "I do. And every payment you've made these past 3 years went into a retirement fund I set up for you and Mom." "That's not possible," he said, voice trembling. "You don't have that kind of money. You work at some little tech company. You drive that old Toyota." "I drive a 2018 Camry because it's reliable," I interrupted gently. "And that little tech company happens to be Sterling Tech Solutions. I'm the CEO." He said nothing. I could hear his breathing, ragged and uneven, like the world had shifted beneath him. "Dad," I said after a moment, "are you sitting down?" "Because there's more." "More. Sterling Properties doesn't just own your house. We own the entire Maple Street neighborhood. 47 homes total, all investment properties." He let out a shaky laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "You're lying. Would you like to see the portfolio? I can email you the documentation." "I don't understand. When did you have—" "You didn't know," I said softly, "because you never asked." He was silent again. Somewhere in the background, I heard Mom's voice ask what was happening. "Put me on speaker," I said. She deserves to hear this too. He hesitated, then I heard the faint click. Isabella, Mom's voice trembled. Honey, what's going on? Hi, Mom, I said gently. Dad and I were just discussing the house situation. What house situation? You were selling it, but it turns out you can't. Why not? Because I said, my voice steady, now you already sold it. To me. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was wounded, bewildered, collapsing under the weight of too much truth. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Tomorrow, they would finally see who their disappointment really was. Dad didn't speak for almost 30 seconds. I could hear only the faint ticking of a wall clock somewhere in the background. When he finally did, his voice sounded years older. You bought our house? Yes, I said. 3 years ago, when Morrison Construction defaulted on the mortgage. No, he muttered. No, that can't be. I was making the payments. You were? I cut in gently. But they weren't going to the bank. I redirected them into a trust fund under your names. Every cent you paid has been invested for your retirement. I heard a short, disbelieving laugh on Mom's end, half shock, half pain. You mean, she said softly. We haven't owned our home for 3 years, and you let us think we did. I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. Because I wanted you to feel secure. You were already drowning in debt. I couldn't bear to watch you lose the house on top of everything else. You should have told us, Dad snapped, voice shaking. You don't just go behind our backs like that. I tried, I said. Remember when I called the week the foreclosure notice came? You told me to mind my own business. You said, don't meddle in things you don't understand. Silence again. The kind that chokes you. Then quietly, Mom whispered, you did all this for us. Why? My voice softened. Because you're my parents. Because I knew if I didn't step in, you'd lose everything. Dad exhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. This doesn't make sense. You don't make that kind of money. You work with computers, for God's sake. Not for anyone, I said. I built my own company, Sterling Tech Solutions. It started as a small consulting firm in my apartment. Now it's worth around $180 million. There was a dull thud, as if Dad had dropped something. 100 what? Mom's voice trembled. Honey, she's joking, right? I wish I were. I allowed myself a small, tired smile that no one could see. But it's real, and I didn't tell you because every time I tried, you changed the subject, or compared me to Michael. The mention of my brother's name hung between us like a bruise that never healed. Dad's voice was tight. This is ridiculous. You expect me to believe you're some kind of business tycoon? That you secretly saved our house, our company, our dignity, for what, Isabella? To make us feel small. The accusation hit harder than I expected. I didn't do it to make you feel small, I said slowly. I did it because I couldn't stand watching you break. You raised me to be strong to solve problems. I just applied that lesson to you. You think you're better than us now? He shot back. No, I whispered. Just different. There was another pause before Mom spoke again, voice cracking. So what happens now? We don't own our house. Your father doesn't own the company anymore, and what you own all of it. Technically, I said yes, but I never intended to take it from you. You can live there as long as you want. The business is still in Dad's name publicly. I only stepped in to stop the bankruptcy. Dad let out a broken laugh, the kind people make when they've run out of anger and pride at the same time. You saved us without telling us. You let us believe we were doing it ourselves. You were playing God, Isabella. Maybe I admitted softly, but you'd never have accepted help otherwise. The line went quiet again. I could hear Mom crying now, soft, restrained sobs that hurt more than any insult ever had. You shouldn't have had to do that, she whispered. We should have helped you, not the other way around. You couldn't have, I said simply. Back then, you were too busy trying to keep everything from falling apart. I just made sure it didn't. Dad finally spoke again, but this time the rage was gone. You always were stubborn. I learned from you, I said gently. He gave a hollow chuckle, then sighed. So what happens now? You kick us out. I hesitated. No, I want to meet, face to face. We need to talk properly. Mom sniffled. When? Tomorrow night. Dinner. My treat. Dad scoffed. Dinner. After all this, you want to sit and eat like nothing happened. Not like nothing happened, I said. Like family. You and Mom deserve to know the truth about everything. About who I am, what I've built, why I did it. Where Mom asked. The Metropolitan, downtown, top floor. There was a long pause before Dad finally muttered, That place costs $200 a plate. I'm aware, I said quietly. I eat there often. A stunned silence followed. Then Mom's voice, small and uncertain. All right, tomorrow night. 7 o'clock, I said, and Dad. Yeah, bring an open mind. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring out at the city glowing below. Every light, every system, every smart intersection was powered by my company's software. A city that once ignored me now ran on my code. Tomorrow, my parents would finally see it too. Not through numbers or words, but through their own eyes. And maybe, just maybe, they'd stop seeing me as their disappointment. The next evening, the rain came in thin, silvery sheets over the city. I'd left work early for once, though. Early for me meant just before sunset. My assistant Clara knocked gently on my door. Miss Sterling, the reservation's confirmed. The Metropolitan's manager says your usual table is ready whenever you arrive. Thank you, Clara, I said, shutting my laptop, and please have Marcus bring the car around in 20 minutes. She hesitated at the door. Your parents, they know who you are now. I gave a small, weary smile. They know enough. Downstairs, the Tesla waited in the private garage. As I stepped inside, Marcus glanced at me through the rearview mirror. Picking up your parents again. Yes, I said softly. Same address. Maple Street. The drive through the rain felt endless. As we pulled up to the familiar two-story house, I saw them waiting on the porch, both dressed neatly but stiffly, as if attending someone else's celebration. Dad's old leather jacket, Mom's pearl earrings. They hadn't changed at all. Marcus stepped out, umbrella in hand. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, he greeted warmly, opening their doors. Dad froze for half a second. Driver, he muttered under his breath. Evening, I said from the back seat, smiling gently. How are you both? Confused, Dad admitted, as he climbed in. And a little nervous. Mom's hands ran along the leather interior, eyes wide. Isabella, this car must cost more than you think it should, I said lightly. But it's efficient. Electric. No one spoke much during the drive. They just stared quietly out the windows at the city lights, at the glowing traffic systems, synchronized billboards that my company had designed. Dad finally broke the silence. These new traffic lights, they're amazing. You barely hit red anymore. Sterling Tech designed those systems, I replied casually. He turned to look at me, his mouth parting in slow realization. You did that? My team did, I corrected. I just wrote the first version of the algorithm. He didn't respond. He just turned back to the window, the truth slowly sinking in. When we arrived, the valet recognized the car immediately. Good evening, Miss Sterling. Your table is ready, he said, giving a polite nod. Mom whispered, they know you by name. I smiled faintly. They should. I own part of the restaurant group. The maitre d' escorted us through the dining room, where polished chandeliers cast warm light over crystal glasses and murmuring conversations. Several business leaders nodded as I passed. One even rose briefly to shake my hand. My parents exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to be proud or embarrassed. At the corner table with its panoramic view of the rain-slicked city, I gestured for them to sit. Francois, the head waiter, appeared moments later with a knowing smile. The usual Miss Sterling. Yes, please, and whatever my guests would like. When he left, Dad leaned forward. They act like you're royalty here. Professional courtesy, I said. I hold a few business meetings here every week. Mom glanced toward the window at the skyscraper directly across the street. That building, Sterling Tower. Is that where your office is? I nodded. The top 5 floors are mine. The rest I lease to other companies. The look on her face was somewhere between awe and disbelief. Dad finally sighed. All right, Isabella, no more secrets. Tell us everything. How did this all happen? So I did, slowly, honestly, without exaggeration. I started Sterling Tech Solutions right after grad school. I had $15,000 in savings and an idea for predictive analytics software systems that could forecast demand, traffic, logistics, even resource distribution. I coded for 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, for almost 2 years. Mom blinked. You went to graduate school. I did, I said. Stanford, full scholarship. Master's in Computer Science and Business Administration. Dad's jaw tightened. You told us you were going to state. I tried to, I said quietly. You were busy with Michael's wedding. I didn't want to interrupt. That landed like a stone between us. The appetizers arrived lobster bisque and seared scallops, but no one touched them. By my second year, I continued. I landed a $2.3 million contract with Henderson Manufacturing. That allowed me to hire 12 people and open an office downtown. Dad froze mid-breath. Henderson Manufacturing. Yes, you built their new warehouse, didn't you? He stared at me, disbelief washing over his features. You recommended us to them, didn't you? I did, I said. They asked if I knew a reliable construction company. I gave them your name. That project saved Morrison Construction 3 years ago. He set down his spoon with a clatter. You got me that job? Yes. His voice cracked. I thought we earned that contract ourselves. You did, I said. I just made sure someone noticed you. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, threaded with realization. Mom reached across the table and took my hand gently. We never even asked what you were working on. I met her eyes. No, you didn't. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. We were so focused on your brother and his family and his business. We thought we were doing the right thing, encouraging the one who needed it most. Dad's voice was low. We were wrong, weren't we? I didn't answer right away. I just looked at them, at the two people who once told me to stop wasting time on computer games. Finally, I said softly, you weren't wrong. You just didn't see me. The waiter returned, placing our entrees before us, but none of us picked up our forks. Dad leaned forward, eyes glistening. Why didn't you ever tell us? Why keep it secret? I gave a small shrug. Would you have believed me? He didn't reply. His silence was answer enough. I didn't do all this to impress you, I said, my tone calm but firm. I did it to prove to myself that I could build something meaningful even if no one believed I could. And when the company started growing, I realized I could help you too, quietly, without hurting your pride. Dad rubbed his face with both hands, his voice muffled. We failed you. No, I said. You just didn't understand me. And I stopped trying to make you. Mom reached across again, squeezing my hand. We understand now, she whispered. Maybe they did, or maybe they just wanted to believe they did. Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the glass, the city shimmered beneath streetlights powered by Sterling's smart grid systems, My Systems. And for the first time in years, the silence between us didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge being rebuilt slowly, painfully, but finally. Dad stared at his untouched steak knife, trembling slightly in his hand. The candlelight threw faint shadows across his face, revealing something I hadn't seen in years, vulnerability. You said Morrison Construction defaulted, he said finally. You said, I almost lost the company. What exactly happened? I drew a slow breath, swirling the wine in my glass before answering. You did lose it, Dad. You just never knew. His eyes snapped up. What do you mean? After the Peterson Plaza job went under, your supplier bills piled up. Then the back taxes, the loans. The bank was preparing to declare you insolvent. I stepped in before they could. Stepped in, he repeated, voice trembling. Sterling Financial Services, I said quietly. One of my subsidiaries. I bought out your debts from the creditors, paid off the liens, and restructured your obligations into manageable plans. Dad's hand fell to the table with a dull thump. You paid our debts. Yes. Mom covered her mouth, eyes brimming. How much? Altogether, about $420,000. That included the back taxes, unpaid invoices, and the mortgage arrears. Dad sat back, shaking his head. You saved me from bankruptcy. I didn't just save you, Dad, I said. I saved your reputation. If the bankruptcy had gone public, you'd have lost your contractor's license. You wouldn't have been able to work again. He blinked, trying to process it all. So Morrison Construction only exists because I made sure it did, I finished gently. He went quiet, the realization settling in like slow poison. Finally, he whispered, all these years I thought I was the one holding the family together. You did, I said softly. You built our foundation. I just repaired the cracks. The words lingered in the air, delicate and heavy all at once. Mom dabbed at her eyes. Why didn't you tell us any of this? You could have asked for help. You didn't need to carry all that alone. I gave her a small, bittersweet smile. You wouldn't have believed I could. Dad let out a shaky laugh, half regret, half self-mockery. You're right. I wouldn't have. I was too proud to even imagine my daughter saving me. He looked up, then eyes glassy. You must hate me. I shook my head. No, I just stopped waiting for you to see me. That broke something in him. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in my life, my father, the man who'd always seemed unshakable, looked small. I thought I was teaching you to be strong, he murmured. You did, I said, just not in the way you expected. The waiter appeared, quietly sensing the tension. Would you care for dessert, Miss Sterling? I glanced at my parents, then back at him. No, thank you. Just coffee for all of us. He nodded and disappeared, leaving the three of us in that strange, heavy quiet. Dad rubbed his temples. You were helping us this whole time. The house, the debts, the contracts. Even that Henderson project. All of it was you. It wasn't charity, I said gently. It was family. He looked up sharply. Family, he repeated the word, tasting foreign. Yes, I said. Even when you didn't believe in me, I still believed in us. Mom reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. We were so blind, Isabella. We were so busy being disappointed that we forgot to be proud. I looked at her for a long moment. Her hand was warm and trembling, her wedding ring glinting faintly under the light. You don't need to apologize, I said. You just need to see me now. She nodded, tears falling freely. We see you. Dad wiped his eyes roughly, pretending it was just the smoke from the candles. I don't know what to say. he muttered. Say nothing, I told him softly, just listen. He nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, he actually did. I told them about Sterling Tech, how it started in a rented basement office, how I'd written the first AI prototype myself, how the company now ran city systems across 3 states. About the smart traffic grid that reduced accidents by 40%, the predictive power systems saving millions in energy costs, the government partnerships, the scholarships. Mom's expression shifted from grief to awe. You built all that. I had help, I said. A good team. But yes, I built it. Dad let out a shaky laugh. You beat Google for that contract, didn't you? I smiled faintly. And Microsoft. He let out a low whistle, then looked down again, voice breaking. And we called you a disappointment. You called me determined, I said quietly. You just didn't use that word. The waiter returned with our coffee. We drank in silence, steam rising between us like ghosts of the past. When the check came, I didn't even glance at it. I slipped my black Amex card into the folder and handed it back. Dad stared at me. How much was that dinner? $847, I said casually. Worth every cent. He let out a strangled chuckle. That's more than I make in a week. I smiled faintly. It's fine, Dad. I've had good weeks. He nodded slowly, his eyes glossy again. You're incredible, Isabella. He stopped himself, his throat tightening. We failed to see it. I leaned back, watching him, watching both of them, really. For years, I'd dreamed of this moment, of them finally understanding. I thought it would feel like victory, but it didn't. It felt like quiet grief, like winning a war that had taken too long to end. The rain outside had stopped completely now. The streetlights glowed against the wet pavement, and through the window, Sterling Tower stood tall across the street, gleaming like a silent reminder of everything I'd built without them. Dad followed my gaze. You really did all this. While we were worrying, you'd end up alone with your computers. I was alone, I said softly, but I wasn't lost. He nodded, voice shaking. And you never stopped caring about us. I couldn't, I said. You're my family. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Dad lifted his coffee cup slightly, hands trembling. To family, he said quietly, even when we don't deserve it. I clinked my cup against his. To family, I echoed. And under the warm lights of the restaurant, surrounded by the hum of quiet conversations and the faint clinking of glasses, something in our fractured family finally began to heal. By the time we left the restaurant, the city had gone quiet. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving everything glistening under the amber glow of the streetlights. My Tesla waited by the entrance, Marcus standing beside it with the umbrella already open. Dad looked at the car again, shaking his head in disbelief. You really have a driver now. It's more practical, I said with a small smile. Late meetings, long days, you know how it is. He chuckled dryly. I wouldn't know anymore. Marcus opened the doors for us, and as the 3 of us settled into the leather seats, the silence inside the car felt different this time. Not sharp, not angry, just fragile. Mom reached for my hand in the dark. Isabella, she said softly. That night 3 years ago when the bank called about the foreclosure. I cried myself to sleep. Your father wouldn't talk to me for days. We thought we'd failed you and Michael both. I stared out at the glimmering skyline, remembering that same week, how I'd been in a different kind of silence, signing legal documents in an empty office, knowing my parents would never know what I'd done for them. I didn't want you to feel like failures, I said quietly. I just wanted you to have peace. Dad cleared his throat. Peace, he muttered. You bought us peace. That's what you did. He turned to me, his voice low and hoarse. When you were growing up, I thought I was teaching you strength, work ethic, but I was just teaching you to live without needing us. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just let the city pass by outside the window, every light reflected in the car like tiny echoes of our past. After a long pause, Mom spoke again, her voice trembling. You said the payments went into a retirement fund. Is that true? Yes. There's about $89,000 in there now. It'll keep growing. She covered her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes. You thought of everything. I had time, I said softly. Time and motivation. Dad let out a hollow laugh. Guilt must have been a hell of a motivator. Not guilt, I corrected. Love. He blinked, caught off guard. After everything we said to you, after how we treated you. I nodded. Love doesn't disappear just because people fail to show it back. The car grew quiet again. We drove through downtown, past the billboards running Sterling Tech advertisements, past the new smart intersections glowing faintly in blue. Dad stared out the window, taking it all in. The city, he said slowly, it feels different now, alive. I smiled faintly. It runs on the systems we designed. He turned toward me, his voice softening. You mean you designed? I mean we, Dad, my team and I. He nodded, looking away again. You always were a team player, he said, even when we didn't deserve to be on your team. Mom squeezed my hand tighter. You don't have to keep doing all this for us. We're adults. We can manage now. I know, I said, but I wanted to. We pulled into their neighborhood, the streetlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. Every house on Maple Street looked peaceful, ordinary, warm, and every single one of them I knew was under Sterling Properties. Dad noticed me looking. You really own all of these? 47 homes, I said, the whole block. He laughed softly, shaking his head. And here I thought you were wasting your life behind a screen. I smiled faintly. Screens can build empires if you know how to use them. When the car stopped in front of their house, neither of them moved right away. The porch light glowed dimly through the drizzle, the same way it had when I was a kid sneaking in past curfew. Dad turned to me, his voice barely above a whisper. You saved our home. You saved my business. And you never said a word. Why? I met his gaze. Because sometimes silence protects better than pride ever could. He looked down, breathing shakily. We were cruel to you, all those years. Telling you to be more like your brother. Telling you you'd never make a living out of computers. I can still hear myself saying it. His voice cracked and he stopped mid-sentence. I didn't respond right away. I just reached out and placed my hand gently over his. It's done, Dad. The past can stay where it is. Mom wiped at her eyes. You shouldn't have had to earn our love. I didn't, I said quietly. I just learned to love differently. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the Tesla engine, the heartbeat of the city outside. Then suddenly, Mom let out a small, broken laugh through her tears. You even donated to the Children's Hospital, didn't you? The one on Jefferson? I smiled. Sterling Foundation funded their new surgical wing. And the scholarships at Jefferson High, also us. Her hand covered her mouth again, trembling. Oh my God. Dad turned to me. You've donated how much? $15.3 million across multiple states, I said simply. About $800,000 locally. He stared at me speechless. Why hide that too, Mom asked softly. Because you would have told me to focus on something more real, I said with a small smile. And because I didn't need applause. I just needed purpose. Tears slipped silently down Mom's cheeks. We were so busy being disappointed that we missed everything that mattered. You were human, I said quietly. That's all. Marcus stepped out and opened their doors, the cool night air spilling into the car. Dad turned in before getting out. Isabella, what happens now? With the house with us. You live here as long as you want, I said. The trust fund is yours. The business is debt-free. You can retire if you want or keep working. It's your choice. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. And you? I smiled faintly. I'll keep building. It's what I do. As they stepped out, Mom turned back once more, her voice trembling. We don't deserve you. Maybe not, I said softly, but you're still mine. She nodded, tears glinting in the porch light. You really are your father's daughter. Maybe, I said, looking past her toward the skyline. But I became the woman you both taught me to survive as. They walked up the porch steps hand in hand, smaller, quieter, but somehow more real than I'd ever seen them. When Marcus pulled away, I looked back one last time at the house where I'd once felt invisible. Now it stood like a symbol of everything I'd built: strength, forgiveness, and the kind of love that expects nothing in return. My phone buzzed just as we merged onto the main road. A message from Dad. Thank you for saving our home, and for still calling us family after everything. I smiled faintly and typed back. That's what family does, Dad. We take care of each other even when it's not appreciated. Then I put the phone down, leaned back against the seat, and let the city lights wash over me. For the first time in years, my heart felt light. Not because they finally saw me, but because I'd finally stopped needing them to. The next morning, the world woke up differently. A bold headline stretched across the business section of the city paper. Sterling Tech secures $1.2 billion. Smart city contract beats global giants. The photo beneath it showed me shaking hands with Governor Ellis, smiling in that polished way CEOs do when cameras flash. But behind that smile was something no one could photograph: peace. By mid-morning, my inbox flooded with congratulations. Investors, journalists, even rival executives who'd once ignored my calls. But among the flood of messages, one name stood out: Dad. Can we come by your office today? I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back a single word. Yes. By noon, they were standing in the marble lobby of Sterling Tower, my tower. I watched from the mezzanine as they walked, in small and awed, craning their necks at the glass ceilings and the glowing blue S that shimmered across the digital wall display. Employees passed by in tailored suits, tablets in hand, greeting me with quiet respect. Mom clutched her purse like she was afraid to breathe too loud. Isabella, she whispered. This place looks like a movie set. It's just work, I said softly, leading them toward the elevators. Dad trailed behind, reading the plaques along the hallway awards. From Forbes, the City Innovation Council, the National Tech Alliance. Each one bore the same name, Isabella Sterling. When the elevator doors opened onto the 43rd floor, they stepped into a glass-walled world of quiet power. Screens tracked city traffic in real time. Engineers murmured over code displays. My assistant Clara greeted them with a professional smile. Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison. Miss Sterling's expecting you. They followed me into my office where the skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The same city Dad had spent decades building with bricks and steel, now powered by my circuits and code. For a while, no one spoke. They just stood there, absorbing it all. Dad finally broke the silence. You really built all this? Yes. He turned toward me, slowly, his voice rough. I don't even know what to say. Then don't, I said quietly. Just see. He walked to the window, staring out at the horizon. You know, he said, voice trembling, I used to tell people you'd never make it in the real world, that you'd end up begging for work from people like me. I remember I said not cruelly, just honestly. He nodded. And now the real world works for you. Mom wiped at her eyes. We were so wrong about everything. I turned to her gently. You weren't wrong about caring. You were just wrong about what success looks like. Dad smiled faintly, still looking out over the city. Michael called this morning, he said. He saw the headline. He didn't believe it until I showed him your photo. Oh, I asked. What did he say? He laughed under his breath. He said, guess we all owe her an apology. I smiled softly. Guess so. For a moment, the three of us stood there watching the city together. No longer divided by pride or misunderstanding, just bound by the quiet truth of who we were now. Then Dad turned to me, his eyes red but clear. Isabella, he said, you raised yourself. You built all this without us. And you still came back. You didn't have to. I know, I said. But sometimes the people who hurt you are the ones you're meant to heal. He blinked back tears. You've become someone I don't deserve to call my daughter. I shook my head. You've always been my father. That hasn't changed. He took a shaky breath, his voice barely audible. Then let's start over. No pride, no pretending, just family. Mom nodded quickly, her hand clutching his arm. Please, let's start today. I smiled, warmth flooding through me. I'd like that. That evening, as they left my office, I stood by the window and watching their car disappear into the slow, golden traffic below. The city pulsed like a living thing, every signal light, every energy grid, every network heartbeat running on the technology I'd built. For years, I dreamed of proving them wrong, of making them regret every dismissive word, every look of disappointment. But now that I had it, didn't feel like revenge at all. It felt like release. My phone buzzed again, another message from Dad. You were right. Sometimes success isn't loud. Sometimes it's silent, steady, and kind. We're proud of you, Izzy. I smiled at the nickname I hadn't heard in a decade. Thank you, Dad. I'm proud of you, too. Outside, the skyline reflected against the glass my empire and my redemption. I turned off the office lights, letting the room fall into twilight, the city glowing beneath me like a promise kept. As the elevator doors closed behind me, one thought lingered in my mind, quiet, certain, and true. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving them wrong while loving them enough to save them anyway.